Welcome everybody to part 3 of our current AIDEN webinar series. We've titled it there you go, I started right at the beginning, the compelling case for global giving. My name's Mark Hubert. I've been a passionate funder and doer in the international space for 15 years. You can hear all those chimes in the background. That's more and more people joining the webinar. Before we jump right in, on behalf of everybody involved from wherever you're tuning in or joining us, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on. We pay our respects to them and leaders past, present and emerging. We also take the opportunity to thank them for the continued care of our land, sea and community. Firstly, some housekeeping. This session is being recorded and will be shown on various platforms, including the AIDEN website and YouTube. If I can ask you to write your full name on your Zoom thumbnail, just so we know who you are. Do please stay on mute unless you are invited to speak, when you do have the ability to unmute yourself. Today, we will have the chat function operating and there will be time for Q&A before the end of our 60 minutes. In our first webinar, we set the scene, describing the Australian international giving sector and ways to approach international giving, how to do more of it and how to do it better. We established that it's a significant part of the Australian philanthropic scene. $1 in $8 goes to this well-regulated and well-curated sector. In webinar 2, we explored the why with Peter Singer, as well as the how with Anita Toy of Give to Asia, Braden Howie of Action on Poverty, and Greg Cadman of Global Development Group. All of them represented giving platforms that can assist you in international philanthropy. We also launched the e-booklet titled Pathways to Global Giving. Today, we are going even more granular and introducing just 3 examples of the 400 or so NGOs that you could choose to support. Firstly, joining me is Angus Grinom of Ripple Foundation. I first crossed paths with Angus back in 2017. I was at the Skoll Forum in Oxford and Angus's name kept popping up as I think he was just starting to move into looking at funding offshore causes. Angus, welcome today.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Tell us, Angus, how you got started on your philanthropic journey.
Look, I think we've always thought that if you're a good citizen, you do what you can to give back to society. So, that normally takes the form of volunteering in some way in your community. But if you're fortunate enough to have a bit of money to give away, we think that that's what you should do. And excuse me, as well as, putting a bit of effort into trying to, spend that money to help others sharing the sort of the good fortune you've had to get to that position. So when we found ourselves in that position, that's what my wife Catherine and I did. We started the foundation in 2014 after probably a few years of meaning to do it, but busy lives getting in the way. So in the end, we thought there's never going to be a good time. We'll just pull the trigger and muddle our way through it. And that's pretty much what we're still doing, muddling our way through it a few years later.
And you've chosen totally international over domestic, Angus, or how are yourself and Catherine managing that balance?
It's pretty much all international. We have a few causes in Australia also around poverty alleviation, but it's high 90s% international. And the reason for that really comes down, for us, down to the fact that all lives are of equal value. So, if you hold that to be true, then you're trying to direct resources to lift people up, then you send those resources to the place where you can lift up the most people. That's really what it comes down to for us. The world is a pretty unfair place. It's a very uneven playing field. So we feel the right thing to do is just to try and do our little bit to try and even it a little.
And do you have a particular regional focus? Are you in the Pacific, just in Asia? Where are you active?
No, we don't have a focus. We're after, great people and great ideas. So not even a specific area, whether it's health or education or whatever it might be. We're agnostic. We just like to spread our wings a bit. And it's actually something, we're found to be a real benefit as well. We're probably, I'm not sure of the exact number, it depends how you add it up, probably across about 15 or 20 countries. Some groups move into multiple countries, so it gets a bit confusing. But something we've found is that, when you're across multiple countries, you get to see often different groups tackling very similar problems in different settings. And what that leads to is different ways of doing things, different solutions. And sometimes those solutions work really well, sometimes they don't. But as a funder, you've got this privileged kind of helicopter view of what's going on in all these different settings. And we're always trying to find ways that we can add value beyond just the dollars that we give. And one of those ways is by, because we get to see what does work and doesn't across all these different groups, across different settings, we can use that knowledge to sometimes, help the groups that we're involved with, but also put them in touch with each other. And often that really helps them to, improve the job that they're doing. And I think if we limited ourselves, let's say we were just in Kenya, for example, we just wouldn't have that benefit that we get from diversification. And I think that also really applies to domestic funders in Australia. I kind of think, well, I really think that there would be a great benefit to organisations that only fund domestically to have a portion of their giving to international groups, even if it was only 5 or 10%, because they would get the benefit of seeing groups in different settings trying to save the same sorts of problems. They can stick to their theme. It might be gender equality or Indigenous issues or climate change, whatever it might be. All these things are problems around the world the different groups are trying to solve. And I really think if domestic groups could learn a lot from putting a bit of their money towards international causes, that'd be a great benefit.
So, does that mean you, if you're looking for people with problems to solve, does that mean you like to fund a specific project, build a classroom or something like that, or do you fund Untied?
Well, yes, we do, and we do fund Untied. So our approach is we say we back people. So we don't back specific projects, or even, we don't even view ourselves as backing organisations, because it's the people that make it all happen. You need people who have the ability to be able to, they've got to be passionate, but unfortunately everyone in this industry is passionate, and that doesn't get results. You also need to be smart. You need to be someone who is able to continually knock down barriers, because they just come at you constantly. You need to be nimble, you need to be clever, and so we're looking for people like that. So when we do our due diligence, we are, we're not so interested in them sending us grant applications and documentation, because there's only so much you can tell from the written word. You really need to talk to people to assess what kind of a person they are, and whether they're the sort that is able to, to really get results. And coming to the question on funding, if we provide Untied funding, we do, because again, we say we're backing people, and we would think it would be a bit hypocritical to say we're backing people and then tell them how to spend the money. So, we say we decide, if they're the sort of people and sort of group we want to go with, and then when we do, we provide multi-year Untied grants, and we really think the best way to go about it is to let them decide how to spend the money, and not us.
Gotcha. So I guess you would call that trust-based philanthropy, really, isn't it? It's trust the partner to spend the funds wisely. Okay.
Very much so. Yes, we need them to spend it well, and they can do that much better than us.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, and so Angus, do you have a budget size, large NGOs, small NGOs? Do you position yourself anywhere in terms of size?
We favour smaller, and I should say we've got nothing against big organisations at all. They play a very important part in this space, and there's things that they can do that small groups are just not able to do. But we favour smaller because we think we're able to add the most value there. So, you know, typically the maximum revenue size would be around 15 million a year in revenue, and we probably wouldn't come into a group at that level. We would grow with them to that level. So at the moment we would have groups anywhere from a couple of 100,000 a year in revenue up to that 15 million level.
Gotcha. Okay. Angus, one of the groups you fund is Dandelion Africa. We have queued a video produced by Dandelion Africa. So let's have a look at that. And then I've got just a few more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to read until I was 11. I couldn't speak a word of English, and opportunity for education changed my life. And that's why I'm very, very drawn to women empowerment, because I see possibilities, because I'm living that possibility. We started with just wanting to give information to women. We needed to teach women about table banking. And as we were doing that, we realized that a lot of the women were having more kids, and their daughters were having kids at the same time. So we needed to bring in the component of talking about sexual reproductive health and rights, not just for the women, but for girls as well. It's very important that women, especially young women, are brought up to believe that they can be anything they want to be, regardless of where they come from, because it's only where you're going that matters. The Girls for Leaders program gives sexuality education to kids in school, to provide sanitary pads, to create opportunity for education. We realized that, okay, we are talking about sexual reproductive health, but where are they supposed to get this service? We decided to take sexual reproductive health services to hard-to-reach communities. And in the last 3 years, we have managed to treat over 100,000 people. So our Boys for Change program came from the boys themselves. They are the ones who said,
girls are not alone.
Girls are not alone.
We are here to support girls and fight FGM.
I will stand with them to fight against FGM.
They champion for girls' rights. And in this particular community, a boy who is 13 has more say than his mother. After the boy child program kicked off, FGM had stopped in most of the villages because it was being embraced from a point of power. It's a program about hope. It's a program about hope. Everybody has the ability to change if they are given the right platform. And especially rural women and rural girls, given the right space, they can use their voices to champion for what they want. Anything is possible. People walk up to us and say, thank you for giving girls voices. I don't think we give girls voices. They were born with voices. All we do here is create safe spaces for them to use their voices. And we're only engaging the boy child to amplify their voices. That's what we are about, just awakening consciousness. Girls were born with voices. Let them use them.
Okay, well, that was in 3.5 minutes. What Wendo Arset has been building for many years now. Angus, just one more question for you, if I may. So you said you fund Untied, you you trust the organisations to put your money to good use. But I want to delve into that issue of trust. It's something I think we've been pretty relentless with through probably all of our presentations here, because a lot of us believe you can trust the individuals that are funding. But how do you know that your money is being spent wisely?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny how this question always comes up with international funding, because I don't see any difference. You know, it can happen domestically as well. There's always a risk that, you know, you're handing over money and something might go amiss. It can always happen, but I think there are just as many, you know, dodgy groups here as there are anywhere in the world, really. I don't see any risk of any of the groups we're involved in as being some kind of a, you know, a scam where the founders are taking money off the top. I just don't, you know, we know them too well. There is trust, but I just don't see that would ever, you know, be a risk for us. What is a risk though is staff. Normally, that you know, and it happens in any sort of organisation, non-profit, profit, where staff can do side deals, take money off the top, that kind of thing, and that is controlled through how well the organisation is run, whether there are the appropriate processes and controls in place, whether there are multiple signatures on bank accounts, these sorts of things. So we cover it off as well as we can with our due diligence process. And you know, to be honest, you'd expect to see something every now and then if their processes are working. But overall, we just don't see it as being a big risk. And really, to get the returns, you have to trust. You have to be able to back them. It's funny, we look at you know, tide funding a bit like saying to a group, if you know, we love what you're doing, it's fantastic, here's a bit more money, go and do more of it, but this time can you do it with one hand tied behind your back? You know, it's just not right. So we want to be able to say, give them the money, trust them, and let them do their thing.
Gotcha. And I guess it's fair to say as well that when you're starting out with smaller groups, it's not like they're recommended by a cab driver or an Uber driver in Nairobi to you, and then you've just said, yeah, that's lovely, let's fund it. They've usually come from another funder who's got a longer history with them, or another NGO. Is that fair to say?
Often, yeah, often. You know, we know a lot of other funders, and you get to, you know, you form an opinion as to, you know, what sort of judgment they have, and often, you know, whether they think a similar way to you. So that counts for a lot. You don't want to reinvent the wheel the whole time. I'm a big fan of, you know, copying the work that other people have done and taking advantage of it if you think that they've done a good job. So often you get that reassurance as well. And you know, between us, we always try and visit groups as well. You know, Eve O'Mara helps a lot with the locally led groups in our portfolio. Mark, you also lend your help, and between us, we would visit pretty much everyone in, you know, that we fund. And then there's other funders as well, and if we can't get there, we know that others have, and we can rely on that.
Great, thanks Angus. Well, your job's done for today, unless we've got some questions for you later on. So don't run away. You referred to Eve O'Mara. Eve, if I can bring you in here, you are the one who's introduced Dandelion Africa to probably quite a few Australian funders now, but that's not to suggest that Wendo's organisation is funded only out of Australia. Eve, could you tell us what you see in Dandelion Africa that is attractive to funders, why you think they're making a difference?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Angus. I think Dandelion is a really good organization. So thank you for supporting them. I'll go back to when I met them. So when I met Wendo, the founder for Dandelion Africa, two things stood out. Passion, and Angus, you said everyone is passionate, but I believe passion has got different levels. Extremely passionate lady, but also very ambitious. Here is a lady who, she didn't meet all the criteria that we were looking for in terms of budget that was, you know, more than 100K, in terms of number of staff. Everything was, she just couldn't make the cut. But then the story behind her was, you know, she had been a successful banker who had quit a successful career to come and help women in her community. And for me, one thing that really stood out was her approach. She did things very differently. Her problem solving was, how do we engage men as champions for women's health? Now, when people address women's issues, they talk to the women. But if you're dealing with domestic violence, female genital mutilation, if you're dealing with women's health, because it's the men sometimes who tell them you can't get family planning medicines, you've got to talk to the men. And that approach for me really stood out. She was using her own funds and resources to further this work. So I knew that this person, with such drive and commitment, there was no way she was going to fail. And indeed, I came to our board, talked about Dandelion, and we had to be flexible in our criteria. And I think she's been one of the biggest success stories for who we've funded. And today, what we see with her is that most of the funding that she's given actually ends up going to the beneficiaries. Very little is spent, via overheads and admin. Not that she doesn't pay her staff, she does, but for them, a lot of this money, it's really value for money. It's impact and bang for your buck. So that's why we continue to fund her. But also, she's grown the organization so much. She's come from just working with, a few hundred women. And right now, with her health services and her table banking, as you saw in that video, she's reaching 300,000 women in four counties in Kenya. But one thing that also stands out is she has been successful eliminating female genital cutting in 10 villages where she works. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And so that's what we see with Dandelion Africa, that your funds are going to be used to, they're going to be used so well, they're going to go far away, to women who would never access services. And she's going to give proper accountability because she's got the skills. She's a former banker. She knows her numbers.
Eve, are you seeing more interest from funders in general in local leaders?
Yes, generally I'm seeing more interest in funders. Initially there used to be hesitations, and the things we used to hear from funders was, they're too small, we can't see impact, they won't give proper accountability. But, once we got a few in and try to show funders that actually you're going to get reports, showed the quality of the reports, a few came on board. Partners for Equity right now is funding more locally led organizations. And every year we keep increasing the number of who we fund because we are seeing them giving very good accountability. They're improving, they're reaching more and more people in their communities. But the thing that stands out for them as well is, one, they are from within those communities. They understand the needs of those communities. So it's a bottom-up approach, and they are trusted by these communities. They are there to stay. And COVID actually was a big eye-opener, because when COVID happened, many of the other organizations that were not really these small organizations packed up and left, and they were the ones who stayed to address the needs of their communities. So I think that was a wake-up call for many funders, that if you want to fund change that is going to last, if you want to fund organizations that are there to stay and are listening to the needs of their, the beneficiaries, this is exactly who you need to be funding.
Gotcha. Eve, I might got a question a statement from Stuart Thompson in the chat page, and it leads to a question. I'm going to read that out. Trust goes both ways. The hardest thing I've found is to gain the trust of the organisation and the community, so they speak frankly. I wonder how you have gone about gaining the trust the other way.
So the trust of the organisation and the community. Yeah,
having them trust you as well, rather than just seeing you as a source of funding that might disappear at December 31st this year.
Right. Yeah. So for me, of course, these relationships have been cultivated over time. And I would say one of the ways you build trust is spending time with people and the community that you're serving. What I see sometimes for funders is they travel all the way from Australia. Australia is really far if you're going to Africa or even some parts of Asia.
There is no doubt about that.
But then they only want to spend an hour seeing a group, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll visit next year and also spend another hour. How are you going to build trust if you're just dropping in, you're not really visiting? When I visit an organization, for some of them, I even spend 2 days depending on the complexity of their programs.
Mhm.
So with Dandelion Africa, when I visit them, I know that that's a whole day blocked off, but I would also take them for dinner, right? I'll meet with them, we'll go for dinner later in the evening. And it's interesting when you're in a more informal setting, you know, you get personal, you find out about their families, what they eat, all these different things, their children, and that is how you start to cultivate this trust-based relationship. I know that funders are very busy, but if you've really believed in an organization, you've invested money in them, don't just visit for 30 minutes. See what they're doing, interact with the communities, and that is how you build trust.
Gotcha. And Eve, you're heading over to Africa again soon after several years of a COVID-related absence?
Yes, this week actually I traveled to Africa over the weekend, so I'm going to be in the field for about 2.5 months. And it's 2.5 months because I'm spending a day with almost each of the groups I'm seeing, 33 groups. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm happy to be back on the road.
Well, hopefully you can buy better tough chicken while you're over in Africa. It's something that I thought it was just low quality chicken, but you've educated me that tough chicken is good chicken. So I'll leave that one to you, Eve.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm going to move along now, and I want to bring in Anna Demand of Australian Communities Foundation. Anna, you spent maybe a couple of decades in the international space. You'll correct me if I'm wrong there. And you're now head of impact at Australia Communities Foundation. Anna, do you see parallels between what you're doing now, which I'm going to assume is pretty much in the domestic space, and your former role at a large PAF that was focused on offshore?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Angus and Eve. Good to see your faces and hear you speak so well. Yeah, I'd say, as Angus said, you know, it's not an either or proposition. If you're going to have a portfolio of funds, if you're going to take a portfolio approach to your funding, then definitely mix it up. Have a mix of domestic and international, because the benefits will be just so obvious to you once you start getting to know those groups. I'd also say, like Angus, that it's about funding good people doing good work, whether that's in Australia or offshore. And picking up again on that lived experience piece, Eve taught me the phrase proximate leadership, and it's one that I use with great abandon now. Yeah, so lived experience, whether it's funding April Day in Australia, who started a foundation to support people who'd lost family in custody, Indigenous people who'd lost family in custody because she herself had lost her own mother, or whether it's funding Wendo at Dandelion Africa, people with lived experience. You know it from your own experience, right? When you have skin in the game, you're more likely to follow through on outcomes, and projects are much more likely to be long lasting. And I guess my final point, another parallel, is it's possible to unlock impact both in Australia and offshore with relatively small funding. So in Australia, to give an example for context, Country Needs People and Indigenous Rangers program shows abundant impact when you look at supporting Indigenous Rangers to live on country and to act as custodians of their own lands. That project has unlocked $600 million of government funding from a relatively small pilot start, funded by small, nimble philanthropy. Similarly, offshore, there's many, many examples of how a funder like Angus might go in or Planet Wheeler back in its day, fund a pilot program, stick with it to show impact, and then help that organisation access those big bilateral funders who can then go on and amplify the impact with the partner. Yeah, those will be my comments.
Yeah, and any examples you could throw at us of perhaps a group where you might have been early stage funding and they might have gone on to bigger and better things when you were in the international space?
Yeah, sure. So 2 examples spring to mind. One in the health space and one in the kind of human rights advocacy space. Development Media International, we funded it when it was early stage, looking at disseminating key health messages around, breastfeed your child, access a health clinic if you're pregnant, clear evidence around those messages, and Development Media International use channels, popular channels of communication such as radio, video, and so on, to disseminate those messages. But importantly, they rigorously monitored for impact against some really basic indicators, most significantly child mortality. And that relatively small project that we were lucky enough to be in at the ground floor with went on to show impact, significant impact in addressing child mortality rates, attendance at health clinics, impacts on malaria, and the list goes on. That organisation is now, thanks to the unlocked funds available through bilateral funding, is now able to exercise its impact in over a dozen countries in Africa. And it also make the point there, of course, that that's our foreign aid budget at work. So funders like Angus, Planet Wheeler, and others can show the way, can do the brave and audacious work of backing projects that might not fly otherwise, and then they can then go on to do great things. Would you like me to also touch on the human rights project?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so this project, Inclusive Development International, they're fantastic. They're also in the kind of contentious and difficult to fund space of human rights / advocacy. They started as a fairly small, actually, I think they're a two-hander, as a husband and wife team who started it in Cambodia. And essentially what they do is they follow the money behind harmful development. So in Cambodia, you immediately think of land grabbing and mass deforestation and the like. And they follow the money behind those kind of harmful projects and work hand in hand with community. Again, this is all about proximate leadership, working with community, taking cues from community as to what the next steps will be to secure redress or compensation for harms, or indeed prevent harm from happening in the first place. So when we started funding, it was one of the most depressing projects because they'd just come off the back of a really big loss. And we came out of that meeting just feeling fairly depressed, but getting that these were good people, like Angus says, doing good work, and they deserve to be backed. And if you look at where they are now, over a decade later, they were behind ANZ Bank, handing back revenue from a loan given to a corrupt Cambodian businessman who literally stole land off of thousands of families. So this group actually was behind the handback of revenue from a commercial bank to dispossessed communities. And that was literally a game changer in terms of international banking accountability. And like I said earlier, David and Goliath stuff, they're much bigger now, I think 30 staff, but they're going up against these big corporate actors who are acting in bad faith, or in the case of ANZ, they're helping actors that want to act in good faith to do the right thing. And yeah, it's an example of how backing human rights, particularly in contexts where there might not be rule of law, can be immensely powerful.
Right, thank you very much, Anna. Hopefully one day we get your passion back in the international sector. I just want to remind everyone, if you've got any comments or any questions you want to put into the chat page, feel free. We want to show a diversity of doers today. So we've talked of proximate leaders, local leaders with Wendo and Dandelion Africa. Anna's raised a few examples of organisations that are based in London and North Carolina doing good things. I now want to show a video of the World Mosquito Program. I think we could call this a homegrown success story, developed out of Monash University in Melbourne and supported in Vietnam by Action on Poverty. And after this video, we're going to talk with Meghal Shah, the Chief Operating Officer of Action on Poverty. So let's roll the video. Meghal Shah, welcome to the conversation. You're Chief Operating Officer at Action on Poverty, which, to remind everyone, in our last webinar, we talked about giving platforms such as Action on Poverty that really can open up the world to Australian donors. Meghal, how did the connection come about between Action on Poverty and the World Mosquito Program?
Thanks for having me, Mark. For us, the connection dates back more than 20 years, and it really resonates with the theme that you brought up around trust. So we have a long history of working on dengue prevention interventions, where we've partnered with researchers from Queensland University and Monash University to take their research from the lab and actually test out in the field the effectiveness of the solutions that look promising. So over a period of 10 to 15 years of trying different methods, we landed on this method used by World Mosquito Program as the method that looks likely to cure dengue as it stands. And so when having that kind of rich history with AOP, trying different techniques in the field, when it came time to scale an intervention that's proven to be fairly effective, Action on Poverty was a natural choice, especially in Vietnam, where we have a representative office with 30 years of experience and deep connections with community, government stakeholders, researchers, universities, health departments, and the like. So for us, yeah, the program was very much in its infancy when we actually met them. And then over the last 3 years, they must have spent at least $20 to $25 million through Action on Poverty. And it's really trying to scale to get the cost down to less than $1 per person protected from dengue. So we've been a partner throughout.
Yeah, and so what specifically was Action on Poverty's role then? The research came out of Monash, World Mosquito Program, are the ones releasing the mosquitoes in the community. So what was your role?
Yeah, so we have two separate roles. So the first one is what we help them do is create an Asia hub. So when the program looked like it was very effective and they needed to scale, they chose Vietnam as their Asia hub to run all their activities out of. And so what Action on Poverty was able to do is using our networks in Vietnam, we were able to develop a standalone office. We were able to facilitate about 20 to 30 expats with different technical skills from around the world that could come to Vietnam and organize all the work permits, HR, legal, and the likes. We also recruited a similar number of local staff that could then help with the deployment of the technology in Vietnam itself. So we were really kind of the Intel chip for them in that we were working in the background to make sure that they can do what they want to do to scale this program whilst having a presence in Vietnam. So that's one. The second thing that we do for also is actually help them deploy their intervention in Vietnam directly. So we would be doing things like community education, community engagement, getting the necessary permits from the health departments to be able to make this intervention work. We'll be procuring lots of bespoke things that you would need. I mean, it's not an everyday way people come in releasing mosquitoes in your community. So there's a lot of rearing and breeding kind of things that we do that we have to procure. So yeah, so that's what we do on the project side of things. So yeah, two separate pieces of activities, but I think, yeah, like I said, the underlying theme for our relationship really has been trust, and that's been built over a very long period of time. For us, we don't provide this kind of Asia Hub services to any other donor, but now we're confident we can because someone trusted us in trying something new, which has proven to be quite effective. So it's kind of opened up a new door for us as an organization in terms of the breadth of services that we could provide to potential donors.
Great, thanks, Megal. That's really interesting about the partnership between the two organisations. And the World Mosquito Program team, they've been back here in Australia in the last few weeks, and yeah, certainly some impressive presentations. It's the elimination of a disease. All that they're lacking is funding, like a lot of the causes that I guess we're talking about today. Okay, so let's go and look at something different again. An overseas effort founded by two Australians, and they call it Forever Projects. Mark and Anna Domkins of Wollongong. I know of two significant NGOs based out of Wollongong, so it looks like it's a happening place. Firstly, let's roll another video titled The Forever Project Story.
Tanzania is breathtakingly beautiful. It's full of hope, vibrancy and life. In our experience of living there, the highs are incredibly high, but the lows are devastatingly low. This is a country where 1/3 of the population lives below the basic needs poverty line. A country where 20 women die every day in childbirth.
Mwanza, this is Tanzania's second biggest city, right on the shores of Lake Victoria. Today we're on our way to visit one of these families. It's a little boy named Daniel, and last year his mother tragically lost her life in childbirth.
When Daniel's mother passed away, his grandmother Martha bravely stepped up to care for him and his 4 siblings. But without the proper nutrition available, she was struggling. It didn't stop her trying everything. She fed him porridge and tea, but he quickly became malnourished. Eventually, when Martha brought Daniel to find help, he was 6 weeks old and weighed only 1.4 kilograms. Tragically, this is a country where babies are abandoned in heartbreak and desperation. They're not unwanted, just unable to be kept. We lived in Tanzania for more than 3 years. We'd moved there with our 2 young children, Jackson and Jemima, and had this dream of providing a family for kids who didn't have one. Eventually, we were able to welcome 3 beautiful kids, Shay, Charlie and Jabari, into our family. A decision that would change our lives and our work forever. My daughter likes to say my wife grew 3 kids in her belly and 3 kids in her heart.
So during our time in Tanzania, we were able to adopt our 3 children who didn't have any other option. And by the end of 2013, we had finalised their adoption and moved back to Australia. But we couldn't just walk away. There were so many more children who needed a family. There's 3 million orphans in Tanzania and we can't adopt them all. None of us could. But the beautiful thing is we don't need to. Most of these are children who have a loving family who would dearly love to keep them if they were able.
The baby home we'd adopted through had a vision for preventing family separation. They just started a new project to give families the confidence to choose a new path towards becoming self-sustaining. One of the women they worked with was Martha. This is Daniel 4 months later. Look at the pride and joy in Martha's eyes as she holds her grandson. This 65-year-old woman is a hero.
Every Tuesday she travelled with him for over an hour each way to training, sometimes walking through bucketing rain. Every Tuesday she was joined by 60 other carers, people just like her with babies just like Daniel. For training in first aid, nutrition and business skills, for an update on their child's weight, for enough formula milk for another week. Our local team empowered Martha to start a business, selling fruit and vegetables at the market near her home. They work carefully alongside each caregiver and help them choose a business that reflects their skills and interests and make sure it's close to their home. 12 months later, Daniel's a healthy 7.45 kilograms. Martha's business is thriving and she makes enough to care for her whole family independently. We like to say we're a river, not a dam. Families pass through, making way for new families to enter and be transformed.
This is how Forever Projects began. We gathered a group of friends around this vision and raised support to fund the project. So we started asking, how could we expand this new, bigger story? The answer, it turns out, is in all of our hands. Forever Projects has become a community for the brave and generous. People like you and I who care deeply about making change in the world. From 6-year-old Penelope, who collected her pocket money, to Wadey, who climbed a mountain and asked his friends to sponsor him, Shelley, who makes beautiful bags, and Jacob brews a beer, Matt uses his photography, Piper gave her birthday. People have made our story their story too. People have used what's in their hands, their time, their talent, their money, and we love connecting every single one of them with the impact they're making. Our community now funds 4 local partners across Tanzania. So far, they've worked with over 700 families like Martha's, meaning there are over 900 babies just like Daniel. They live at home in their community with their own thriving family.
This is Forever Projects.
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 We invite you to be part of it. We guarantee that 100% of every donation will directly fund the expansion of this work. Click subscribe to become part of our monthly giving community today. Together, we're more powerful than we are alone.
I had on myself on mute. Mark Donkins, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Mark. And mate, we're both Mark and we're both in front of bookcases. So there you go.
Yeah, but I can't read, so I haven't read any on mine. What about you?
Oh, yeah. I'll just pretend to then.
So, Mark, I think I get this. You had 3 kids of your own. You welcomed Shay, Charlie, and Jabari into your family. So you only had 6 kids. You had spare time on your hands. So, how did you grow Forever Projects from that stage onwards?
Yeah, mate. Well, I think it's like anyone who's been and experienced the work closed hands. The question that was on our hearts was, what would it have taken to change the circumstances of our children's biological mother so that separation was never necessary in the first place? And that was the very question that the baby home we adopted from were asking. And so we quickly fell in love with their vision to prevent family separation. They started a pilot project in Mwanza in Western Tanzania. And so we just stumbled into fundraising, just friends and family, annual fundraisers, that kind of stuff. And Forever Projects kind of just grew from there. And I think the key's been one of my mentors that I love, thought leader Seth Godin, talks about the 2 currencies of our connection economy are trust and attention, and they're in a virtuous cycle. And so stories are the ways that we can build trust. Gain attention, and then when we can actually follow through with the promise that we make through inviting donors to be part of that and then connect them with the impact, that circle continues. And so even since that video was created a couple of years ago, the impact's grown, and there's now 6 locations that the local partners we're funding and working with, and they've now empowered 1,250 families and more than 1,500 babies. So when we think about that being 1,500 babies that didn't need to be separated at all, it's extremely inspiring. And it's, as I think you said, Angus, at the start, the most important part is that the funding we're sending is it's reliable and it's unrestricted. So that untied multi-year funding being really important. I guess the other thing that's interesting, Mark, is that we've just stumbled into a grassroots kind of focus, as you can tell from the video there. And so what we're trying to do as we're growing is think about how can we build that best practice for international giving into the kind of revenue streams. And so that the monthly donors are forming, like, I guess, a collective giving amount that goes to the teams, and it provides monthly reliable and unrestricted funding. And that's really what our heart is to grow over the coming years.
So, Mark, you talk of building trust. Do you actually build any children's homes yourselves?
No. So the goal would be, like, the baby home we adopted from, their vision is a day where that baby home is no longer needed as an orphanage, because there are no orphans coming into the home, and the families have been caught upstream through systems change. So, for example, when we started fostering our children in 2010, we left with our 3 kids, and there were 57 other children that weren't going to a family. As a result of the work, that number's down to less than 30. So I think currently there's 26 children in that baby home. The malnourishment ward at the hospital, at Baganda Hospital in Mines, is empty because of the work ahead of the problem, if that makes sense, with those local teams. And so their heart is to scale that across other centres in Tanzania. So the funding is going towards the nutrition for the children. It's a 12-month project, as was outlined in the video. So first of all, obviously nutrition for the malnourished child, crisis support for the family, for the caregiver, and then both group and individual training for the caregiver to set up a small business in their community, like Martha, so that at the end of the 12 months, they're independent and able to provide for the family ongoing. So the funding is purely for the local teams, the crisis support, and the small capital outlay for the business setup. Yeah.
Well, and there was mention in the video that 100 cents in the dollar goes to the projects. Can you explain the magic there?
Yeah, so I'd imagine a lot of people have heard of Charity Water, the charity in the US, and they innovated an interesting business model back in 2006 where they segmented their costs as a charity. So they said they're going to have their cost of fundraising funded by a smaller group of donors, which meant that they could make the promise that 100% of every other cent raised by the public would reach the projects. And we had already developed a really core group of donors, friends and family. As we grew, we thought, well, let's ask that group to fund our cost of fundraising in Australia, so that every other donor we can make that promise and deliver on it, that 100% goes to Tanzania. We've partnered with Global Development Group from the very start. So I could see Josh and Greg from GDG here, which is amazing. And so all the governance, auditing, reporting, helping us build our capability with impact measurements, been really through that partnership. But even the funds sent through them, that cost is also included in the funds covered by that group of 55 donors in Australia. So that's how that's made possible. And obviously that's not something that's going to work for every charity, but it definitely worked for us. And it, I guess, took that question of how much of my money is going to Tanzania off the table. Sure. We've been able to consistently say 100% is going, not because there are no overheads. I know there's an argument about, Dan Pallotta's famous TED talk about, overheads being bad for charities, which is obviously rubbish. But we're just saying the overheads are covered by another group. So your money is going to Tanzania, and we'll connect you with the impact of that. Yeah.
Gotcha. And future plans, Mark? Adopt another 6 kids?
Well, that's obviously that the point is that adoption, I mean, where it's
happen
there, and it's all in the next, in the near future, that's obviously not a reality that we're going to see. There's always going to be a need for, as a last resort, that's going to be a better option for children than institutional care. But the goal would be to continue scaling the project throughout Tanzania and then beyond those borders, pending funds. So our goal really is to how do we scale up our fundraising operations in Australia, really doubling down on the segments that we're seeing most fruit with, especially during the last 2 years with COVID. And then if we can consistently fund the existing partners we have, we would feel confident to start looking at other partners that align with that same mission of helping women break the cycle of poverty and creating a self-sustaining future. Yeah.
And just last question, what is your annual budget roughly, Mark?
In Australia, or
your total group budget as such.
yeah, so our current budget in Australia is we've got a small team, 150 grand, and the teams on the ground, it's about 850,000 currently for the work there. So so we believe if we can grow our budget here in Australia, we can scale up our operations and then consistently meet that for them, in which case we can scale further. Yeah, well, we can empower them to scale further, and obviously it's really important that it's locally led, and our role is to shine a light on the amazing work they're doing and fund it with unrestricted and reliable funds. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Mark, and wish you success with that. Time is running out on us, as it always does. So we'll call it a wrap for today. Many thanks to our guests, Angus Grinom, Eva Marla, Anna Demand, Megal Shah, and Mark Donkins. Thank you to Philanthropy Australia, who've supported us in this endeavour. This recording will, as always, be available on the Australian International Development Network's website within a few days, and also on Philanthropy Australia's Better Giving Hub. What else is happening in the network? The latest Philanthropod is out, and this time it's Anuba Rawat interviewing Wawera Ninjiru of Food for Education in Kenya. So if you want to know how a graduate of Adelaide University goes within 1 decade to feeding 33,000 school children a day, with funding and a trajectory to get to 100,000 a day before the end of this year, and a target of 1 million. If you want to know how that all happens, go and crash the Spotify or the Apple iTunes websites and have a listen. It is a cracker. The next in our webinar series is a 3-part series unpacking and exploring impact investing for donors. If you're a philanthropy-only focused guy like me, because I'm probably too lazy and getting too old to learn anything else, this is a session for you to begin your journey into the world of impact investing. So email us if you've got feedback or comments, or you'd like to discuss further more and better international giving. You can contact Julie Rosenberg or Emily Umbers of Aden. You can also consider Dandelion Africa as a locally led initiative, Forever Project supporting locally led organisations, and alternatively, you might have been excited by the Australian research and the promise of the World Mosquito Project. We're here to assist anyone who wants to participate in more and better international giving. I find it intriguing. It's definitely effective. It's occasionally challenging, but you know what? To quote Peter Singer, you actually can save a life. Thank you for your participation today. Make the most of the rest of your day and your week.